Tales of the Incandescent episode 7, Illumination Number 9, A Dead Man's Rifle. In the waning light of a summer afternoon in 1879, young dandy Broomsbreade sat in the lush grass beside a babbling brook. His loyal hunting dog, Ripple, lay contentedly at his side, both of them basking in the peaceful serenity of the forest. Dandy, a man of perhaps 26 or 28 years, he couldn't quite recall, adjusted his suspenders and took aim with his trusty rifle at a group of ducks paddling lazily on the far side of the water. The tranquil scene was shattered by the thunderous report of Dandy's rifle. A plume of smoke rose into the air, hanging like a misty curtain before slowly dissipating. Ripple's head shot up, ears perked, ready to retrieve his master's kill. But as the smoke cleared, it became apparent that Dandy's aim had been less than true. The ducks continued their peaceful swim, unperturbed by the nearby commotion. Ripple, realizing there was nothing to retrieve, gave Dandy a look that seemed to say, "Oh, nothing fell? Okay, then," before settling his head back down on his paws to resume his relaxation. Frustration etched across Dandy's face as he began the process of reloading his rifle. But luck was not on his side. The weapon began to jam as he attempted to it. His patience finally snapped. "I've had it," Dandy exclaimed, his voice echoing across the water. In a fit of anger, he sprinted to the edge of the creek. With all his might, he hurled the shotgun at the birds as if it were a boomerang or a ninja star. The rifle whirled through the air in wild circles before splashing unceremoniously into the brook. Dandy watched with a mixture of regret and lingering frustration as the metal half of the gun began to sink, leaving only the wooden stock bobbing above the water's surface. Defeated, Dandy trudged back to where Ripple lay, the dog's eyes following his every move. "It'll make better driftwood," Dandy declared, more to convince himself than his canine companion. He flopped down next to Ripple, laying his head on the dog's warm, furry belly. Ripple, ever the accommodating friend, rested his head back in the grass. As Dandy lay there, a palpable sadness hung over him. The ducks, still alive and blissfully unaware of their near brush with death, seemed to mock him with their contentment. The stillness of the moment was abruptly shattered by the sharp crack of a gunshot echoing from somewhere deep in the woods. Dandy bolted upright, his senses suddenly on high alert. He strained his ears, trying to pinpoint the direction of the sound. Before he could fully process what he'd heard, a second gunshot rang out from the same direction. Dandy's eyes widened in surprise and curiosity. He looked down at Ripple, who was now also fully alert. His ears pricked forward. "Yeah, boy, you're right," Dandy said, his voice a mix of excitement and trepidation. "That was 2 gunshots right after each other." He paused, considering the implications. "Reckon you know anybody live around here? Been hunting in pairs?" "Huh." Curiosity getting the better of him, Dandy decided to investigate the source of the gunshots. With Ripple trotting faithfully at his heels, he made his way deeper into the woods, following the echo of the mysterious shots. As they pushed through the dense underbrush, the terrain began to change. The forest floor sloped downward, leading them to the bottom of a steep cliff. There, leaning against the rocky wall, Dandy and Ripple stumbled upon a sight that made them both freeze in their tracks. An older gentleman, dressed in fancier suspenders than Dandy's, sat slumped against the cliff face. His eyes were closed, his body unnaturally still. Beside him on the ground lay a rifle, its polished wood gleaming in the dappled sunlight that filtered through the canopy above. Dandy approached cautiously, his heart pounding in his chest. As he drew closer, the grim reality of the situation became apparent. The man was dead. "Well, how about that?" Dandy exclaimed, his voice a mix of shock and awe. He leaned over the body, studying the man's face. A twinge of guilt and respect washed over him. "If I had a hat, I'd take my hat off to you, mister," Dandy said solemnly. "But I reckon I don't much often wear a hat." Dandy stood there awkwardly, fidgeting with his hands as he addressed the deceased stranger. I reckon I don't much have a working firearm no more neither, mister," he continued, his voice tinged with embarrassment. Not that I'm much a good shot anyways." He paused, considering the circumstances that might have led to this man's demise. "Shucks, I guess you wasn't neither. Lesson, of course. Well, you know, the other guy was better." Dandy took a few steps back, kicking up dirt as he continued his one-sided conversation with the corpse. It's them ducks who's better than me, shucks. His gaze was drawn back to the body, and more specifically to the gleaming rifle that lay beside it. Dandy's eyes widened as he admired the weapon, so different from his own waterlogged gun. Reckon. Well, I reckon you ain't gonna be needing this no more, not where you's going, ain't that right, mister? Dandy mused, a hint of guilt creeping into his voice. He cast a furtive glance over his shoulder, ensuring he and Ripple were truly alone. Then, with trembling hands, Dandy reached down and grasped the dead man's rifle. As he stood up, clutching his newfound prize, he gave a respectful nod to the deceased. With one last nervous look around, Dandy turned and began to retrace his steps, heading back the way he and Ripple had come. He whistled for his dog, who had wandered off to investigate some nearby bushes. At the familiar sound, Ripple bounded back to his master's side. As Dandy and Ripple disappeared into the thick underbrush, the clearing fell silent once more. The body of the unknown hunter remained propped against the cliff, a solemn testament to the day's events. Dandy and Ripple emerged from the woods, finding themselves back at the familiar brook where their adventure had begun. The ducks were still there, going about their duck business, swimming, diving for fish, and lounging on the far bank. "Ready, boy?" Dandy asked, a newfound confidence in his voice as he raised the dead man's rifle to his shoulder. Ripple sat at attention, ears perked and eyes fixed on his master. Dandy took careful aim, his heart racing with anticipation. "Dead man, don't fail me now," he whispered. Bang! The sound of the shot echoed across the water. Ripple's ears shot up in surprise, his eyes wide. For a moment, everything was still. Then, with a splash, one of the ducks fell from the sky and into the brook. Without hesitation, Ripple leapt into action. He bounded across the rocks in the shallow water, making his way to retrieve his master's kill. "Ha, ha, ha," Dandy exclaimed, a look of shocked joy spreading across his face. As Ripple returned, the dead duck held gently in his mouth, Dandy was already taking aim at the next bird. His hands moved with newfound surety as he reloaded the rifle. "It's over, you oversized pheasants," Dandy declared with a grin. Boom! Another duck fell, and once again, Ripple dashed to retrieve it. As the dog returned with the second bird, Dandy's face beamed with pride. He reached down to pet Ripple, praising him for a job well done. Dandy took the ducks from Ripple's mouth, holding them up triumphantly. He marveled at their size, feeling a sense of accomplishment he hadn't known in quite some time. "Looking like we'll be eating tonight after all, boy," Dandy said, his voice filled with excitement. Ripple wagged his tail enthusiastically, sharing in his master's joy. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the landscape, Dandy and Ripple made their way home, their successful hunt a stark contrast to the day's earlier frustrations. The Broomsbreade family cabin came into view as Dandy and Ripple crested a small hill. It was a rustic structure, more akin to what one might call a shack or a small barn by modern standards. The humble homestead was nestled in a small clearing surrounded by dense woods. A modest potato garden sprawled to one side, a testament to the family's self-sufficiency. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere was tense. Around a simple wooden table sat Grandma Broomsbreade, an old woman whose wrinkled face was partially hidden beneath a well-worn bonnet. Next to her was Mama Broomsbreade, a middle-aged woman who bore a striking resemblance to her mother, right down to the similar bonnet perched atop her head. Papa Broomsbreade, a stout middle-aged man with no hair, saggy eye sockets, and prominent jowls, completed the trio. His suspenders strained slightly against his ample frame as he leaned forward, worry etched across his features. In the small kitchen area, Dandy's younger sister, Holly Barbara, worked diligently. She wore a bonnet and apron much like her mother and grandmother, her hands busy mashing a meager portion of potatoes with a mortar and pestle. The rhythmic sound of her work provided a backdrop to the concerned conversation taking place at the table. "That boy better get home soon," Mama Broomsbreade fretted, her eyes darting to the cabin's single window. "Dark out there." Papa Broomsbreade's brow furrowed deeper. "Hope nothing happened upon him, Lord forbidden." "Don't you be talking that way," Mama chided, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her own fears. Holly Barbara approached the table, carefully balancing the small dish of mashed potatoes. "Thank you, darling," Grandma said warmly as Holly set the plate in the center of the table. "Thank you, Holly Barbara," Mama echoed, offering her daughter a grateful smile.
Papa Broomsbreade nodded appreciatively. Don't know what we'd have without your tater crop, hon, for serious. It's mighty fine blessing you bring your family's table, it is. Thank you, girl. Holly Barbara blushed at the praise, taking her seat at the table. But before she could fully settle, the front door burst open with a bang that made everyone jump.
There stood Dandy, silhouetted in the doorway, his new rifle slung across his back and Ripple at his heels. In his hands, he proudly held aloft 2 plump ducks, a wide grin splitting his face. "Good evening, y'all," Dandy proclaimed triumphantly. The family turned as one, shock written across their faces. Mama and Holly Barbara leapt to their feet, staring at Dandy in disbelief. "Dandy, where have you been?" Mama Broomsbreade demanded, her relief quickly giving way to exasperation. Papa Broomsbreade's voice was stern but tinged with concern. "Pretty late, son. Had us worried." Dandy's grin never faltered. "Aw, shucks, Pa. You ain't got nothing to worry about with me and Ripple. We knows what we's doing out there in them woods." Holly Barbara's eyes were fixed on the birds in Dandy's hands. "Clearly you do," she exclaimed, a mix of admiration and envy in her voice. Dandy set the ducks on the table with a flourish. Grandma had already turned her attention to Ripple, her gnarled hands gently petting the dog's head. "Dandy, they're huge," Mama Broomsbreade gasped, her earlier anger forgotten in the face of such bounty. Dandy's cheeks flushed with pride. "I know. Juice, right?" It was then that Papa Broomsbrade's keen eyes noticed something amiss. His gaze fixed on the unfamiliar rifle slung across his son's back. "Son, that ain't the rifle I gave you." Dandy's triumphant demeanor faltered slightly. "Yeah, I met a mountaineer and he, well, Pa, I traded the old gun you gave me." He paused, his words tumbling out faster as he sought to explain. "But this gun's much nicer, Pa, really. Take a look at it, Pa. You'll see. And I got them ducks with it, I did, Pa." With a mixture of pride and apprehension, Dandy unslung the rifle and handed it to his father. Papa Broomsbreade took the weapon, turning it over in his hands with a critical eye. "It is a pretty nice-looking gun," Papa admitted, his gaze shifting between the impressive firearm and the equally impressive ducks on the table. "And you caught these fat fellas both with this old thing, you say? Well, I'll be a goner. How's about that?" Holly Barbara, her curiosity piqued, pressed for more information. "A mountaineer, you say? Dandy?" Dandy nodded, perhaps a bit too enthusiastically. "Yeah, passing through, won't see him again. Got lucky I did, sure did, I reckon." Mama Broomsbreade's brow furrowed in confusion. "But why would a man want to trade a gun like this shiny new sharp-shooting thing for a rusty old clunker like your old gun?" Papa Broomsbreade bristled at the slight to his family heirloom. "Hey, now, that rifle's a Broomsbreade family piece, a legend she was." "Oh, ha, 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 ha. Sorry, Papa." Mama backpedaled, realizing her misstep. Dandy couldn't help but laugh, the tension in the room dissipating slightly. Holly Barbara's eyes sparkled with romantic notions. "I would have sure loved to have gotten to meet that mountaineering stranger. Was he handsome, Dandy?" Dandy waved off her question. "Doesn't matter. Like I told you, he's long gone by now, Holly Barbara." Holly slumped in disappointment, but her spirits quickly lifted as she turned her attention back to the ducks. "Well, he got us these ducks at least. I reckon I can be sure glad about that." "I got the ducks," Dandy protested. "Not some mountaineer." Mama and Papa shared a laugh at their son's indignation, while Grandma seemed more interested in eyeing the plump birds, already imagining the feast to come. As night fell, the Broomsbreade cabin stood as a warm beacon in the darkness. Outside, fireflies danced in the yard, their gentle light mingling with the soft glow of the moon high overhead. The small potato garden lay silent, awaiting the next day's tending. Meanwhile, deep in the woods, at the top of the cliff where Dandy had made his fateful discovery, something stirred. The spot where the dead man had lain was now empty. The body vanished without a trace. The forest seemed to hold its breath as if waiting for something to happen. In the peaceful glow of the following day, Dandy and Ripple once again found themselves at the brook. The familiar scene of ducks paddling lazily across the water greeted them. But this time, Dandy's confidence was palpable. Taking careful aim with his new rifle, Dandy squeezed the trigger. Bang! A duck fell from the sky, splashing into the water.
Without missing a beat, Dandy reloaded and took aim once more. Bang! Another duck met the same fate. Dandy lowered the gun, marveling at its effectiveness. "You are truly something else, ain't you?" he murmured, beginning to reload. His focus on the weapon meant he didn't notice Ripple wandering over to a patch of bushes at the edge of the woods, sniffing around curiously. "I think we got plenty again today," Dandy called out, still not looking up. "I know, Rip, but what do you say we pluck a few more out of the sky just for practice, eh, boy?" Suddenly, Ripple started barking at the woods, his tone urgent and defensive. Dandy spun around, concern etched on his face. The dog was growling now, stepping back while occasionally letting out a loud, warning bark. "Ripple, what is it, boy?" Dandy asked, hurriedly finishing loading and cocking the rifle. He kept a wary eye on both the dog and the woods, raising the gun and taking aim at the tree line. Without warning, Ripple's demeanor changed. The dog whimpered and rushed back to Dandy, cowering at his leg. Dandy looked down, confused. What the heck? For a long, uncomfortable moment, Dandy stood there, rifle pointed at the woods. As the dog continued to cower at his feet, the forest remained still and silent. Nothing emerged from the shadows. Finally, deciding it was time to leave, Dandy began to turn away. "Come on, Rip, let's go," he said, grabbing his ducks. They walked off in the opposite direction of whatever had spooked Ripple in the woods. As they made their way along a steep, high ridge with a narrow trail cutting through it, Dandy's unease grew. He found himself peering into various gullies and down the side of the ridge, his senses on high alert. Ripple seemed to mirror his master's anxiety, both of them on edge as they traversed the mountainous terrain. The trail curved downward, leading them into a more densely forested area.
The heavy shade only intensified their nervousness. But as they emerged onto another steep ridge, the land rising once more, Dandy's attention was caught by something in the distance. At a clearing where the foliage thinned, allowing a view all the way down into the ravine, Dandy froze. He stood there, squinting hard as if not believing his own eyes. "What in the world?" he muttered, a hint of fear creeping into his voice. In the distance, standing in a small clearing amidst some boulders deep in the ravine, was a sight that chilled Dandy to his core. A freshly rotting zombie, wearing the same clothes as the dead man from the day before, stood stock still. Its lifeless eyes were fixed on the top of the ridge, staring directly at Dandy. Swallowing hard, Dandy turned to his faithful companion. "Come on, Rip. Let's go," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. They hurried away from the unsettling scene, Dandy's mind racing with the implications of what he'd just witnessed. That evening, as the Broomsbreade family sat down to enjoy their bountiful meal of duck meat, the mood was jovial save for Dandy. He chewed solemnly, his mind clearly elsewhere, head bowed over his plate. Papa Broomsbreade noticed his son's demeanor. "What's the matter, son? You seem tired. Long hike today?" Dandy barely looked up. Yeah, it was steep." "Went up through the ridge?" Papa pressed. "Yes, sir," Dandy replied, his voice flat. Papa's curiosity was piqued. "Now, what was you doing way up there, Fear? Ducks fly away from you making an escape, or you just trying to make use of the high ground of the land?" Dandy's response was vague. Yeah." The family exchanged glances, sensing Dandy was hiding something. Holly Barbara couldn't resist teasing her brother. "You sure ain't too good at keeping secrets, are you, Dandy?" "I'm not keeping any secrets," Dandy protested, a bit too quickly. Mama Broomsbreade chuckled. "Well, now we know you's got a secret." "Do not," Dandy insisted. But his family wasn't buying it. Papa's eyes lit up with sudden understanding, or so he thought. "Spilly a girl?" he said, turning to his son excitedly. "You're taking her up there for a romantic view, right, boy?" Dandy, seeing an opportunity to deflect, seized it. "Very romantic." Holly Barbara's face fell. "Why does Dandy get to meet somebody and I miss the mountaineer?" "On account of the fact that I'm much better looking than you, Holly Barbara," Dandy retorted, a hint of his usual spirit returning. Mama Broomsbreade was quick to intervene. "Be nice to your sister. Don't be getting all cocky just on account of having yourself a new rifle and a new girl all of a sudden." Grandma Broomsbreade, focused more on the meal than the family drama, chimed in. "He can be as cocky as he wants as long as he keeps bringing these big juicy mallards home." She forked a large piece of meat into her mouth, savoring it as she chewed. Suddenly, a loud thud against the wall of the cabin from outside interrupted the family's banter. Everyone turned to look at the wall where the sound had come from. Dandy's face drained of color. Papa Broomsbreade's brow furrowed. That's not an animal. He looked around at his family, concern etched on his face. Well, I reckon that sounded like, if I ain't mistaken, it sounded like a person knocking like on a door with a balled-up fist. The rapid succession of thuds sent a chill through the room. Mama Broomsbreade's voice quavered slightly as she urged her husband, "Well, go outside, Pa." Papa nodded, rising from his seat. "Come on, Dandy," he said, motioning for his son to follow. As they headed for the door, Papa noticed Dandy hadn't brought the gun. He stopped, fixing his son with a stern look. "Dandy, grab your rifle. We don't know who's out there, boy. What are you, naive or something?" Awkwardly and shamefully, Dandy retrieved the gun. Papa's concern grew. "Now, what's the matter with you, boy?" Dandy's response was halting. "Nothing. I reckon I just wasn't expecting no visitors so late in the night, was all." "Holly." Barbara's eyes lit up with excitement. "Maybe it's the mountaineer." Grandma Broomsbreade chuckled. "He probably wants to trade his rifle back." "Then why didn't he knock on the front door? He simple or something?" Mama Broomsbreade wondered aloud. Grandma's eyes twinkled mischievously. "Maybe it's Dandy's little lady friend?" Her words were cut off by another series of thuds, this time from the other side of the cabin. Everyone whirled to face the new source of the noise. "What in tarnation?" Mama Broomsbreade exclaimed. Holly Barbara's earlier excitement had turned to skepticism. "I don't want him no more as if he can't even figure out how to find the front door of a little old cabin like ours." The thuds continued, growing more insistent. Papa Broomsbreade had had enough. "Now, this is ridiculous. Come on." He swung open the front door and strode out into the night. Dandy hesitated for a moment, clutching the rifle tightly. He cast one last look at his family before rushing after his father. Outside, Dandy and Papa ran around the cabin, searching for the source of the mysterious thuds. But there was no one to be found. The night was still and silent, offering no clues to the strange occurrence. Perplexed and slightly on edge, they returned inside. Mama Broomsbreade's worried face greeted them. "Who was it, Pa?" Papa shook his head, bewildered. "The strangest thing, they must have took off." "Took off?" Mama repeated, disbelief coloring her voice. "You heard me, woman. Took off," Papa insisted. "Probably on account of us in here taking so long to get there and see what the poor fool ever wanted. We're a janky bunch, I do tell you what. Oh, boy, I sure do." Dandy remained silent, his nervousness palpable. Suddenly, a loud thud from the roof made everyone jump and look up. Grandma Broomsbreade's voice was barely above a whisper. "Say, you don't think..." The sound of footsteps walking across the roof filled the cabin. Papa Broomsbreade's eyes widened in disbelief. "What in the holy name of Davy Crockett?" Without hesitation, Papa and Dandy rushed outside once more. They stood in the yard, staring up at the roof. What they saw there defied all logic and reason. A decomposing zombie in suspenders and a button-down shirt stood on the roof, growling down at them. Its skin was a sickly shade of green, its eyes milky white and lifeless. Papa Broomsbreade's voice was a mixture of shock and terror. "What in the world?" Dandy stood frozen, trembling from head to toe. "Shoot it, boy! Shoot it!" Papa yelled. But Dandy couldn't move. He was paralyzed with fear, the rifle useless in his shaking hands. "Boy!" Papa shouted again, but it was too late. The zombie had already run to the far side of the roof, disappearing from view. For a moment, father and son stood there, trembling in the dark silence as they stared at their cabin. The night that had started so normally had taken a terrifying turn, and neither of them knew what horror still lay in wait. As they stood there, frozen in fear, Mama came outside. "Everything all right, Pa?" she called, her voice tinged with worry. The door slammed shut behind her with a bang, startling her so badly she let out a scream. She ran to her husband and son, seeking protection. From inside the house came an inhuman roar that chilled them to their bones. "What the heck is going on, Pa?" Mama cried, clinging to her husband's arm. "I don't know," Papa admitted, his usual confidence shaken. He looked at his trembling son and made a decision. "Give me that," he said, snatching the rifle from Dandy's unresisting hands. Papa rushed to the cabin's only window, a small, propped-up plank on hinges high up next to the door.
Realizing he wasn't tall enough to reach it, he tried to push open the cabin door, but it wouldn't budge. Dandy, do something. Don't just stand there, Mama pleaded. As Papa pounded on the door, Dandy sprang into action.
He ran for the window, leaping up to grab the edge. With a grunt of effort, he pulled himself up and tumbled through the opening. Inside the cabin, Dandy hit the floor hard. Ow! God dang! He groaned, struggling to his feet. As he regained his bearings, he realized the room was in chaos. The table and chairs had been overturned, scattered around the room. There were clear signs of a violent struggle. Suddenly, from behind the overturned table, a horrifying sight emerged. Grandma, but not as Dandy had ever seen her before. Her skin was a sickly green, her veins bulging grotesquely, and her eyes were pure white orbs. She sprang up with a bone-chilling roar. Dandy screamed, stumbling backward in terror right into the waiting arms of his zombified sister. She squeezed him tight, cackling with a low, demonic laugh that made his blood run cold. Zombie Grandma climbed over the table, advancing on Dandy as he struggled in his sister's iron grip. Thief, Zombie Grandma accused, her voice a rasping growl. No, Dandy pleaded, his voice cracking with fear. Yes, Zombie Grandma insisted, her dead eyes boring into him. Please, I'll give the gun back, Dandy babbled, desperate for a way out of this nightmare. My pa has the gun. He's right outside, please. Zombie Grandma's only response was a chilling cackle. The front door suddenly blew open and the rifle owner Zombie lumbered in, followed closely by Pa Zombie and Ma Zombie. They were all growling, their faces twisted in hunger and rage. The zombies crowded around Dandy, grabbing at his face and chest, their moans and growls drowning out his terrified screams. Then, in a surreal twist that nearly broke Dandy's mind, Zombie Ripple walked through the door. In his mouth, he carried the rifle. The undead dog approached Dandy, and the other zombies released their hold on him. Dandy stood there, staring at his once loyal companion, now a fleshy, rotting, mangy creature. Ripple dropped the rifle at Dandy's feet and barked a sound more like a lion's roar, mixed with a rabid dog's snarl. Foam dripped from Zombie Ripple's jaws as Dandy, sobbing now, slowly reached down to pick up the rifle. Some of the foam got on his hands, making him cringe. The dog growled fiercely in response, showering Dandy with more foam and terrifying him further. Dandy quickly grabbed the rifle and stood up, looking around at the nightmarish versions of his family and the stranger whose gun he had taken. You know what you have to do, right, Dandy? Zombie Grandma asked, her voice a horrible parody of her once kindly tone. Give him the rifle back, Dandy asked, his voice small and trembling. All the zombies cackled in unison, the sound filling the room with hellish, insane laughter. You owe for what you took, boy, Zombie Grandma growled. Equivalent exchange is the law. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Me. She grinned, revealing sharp yellow teeth behind wormy black lips. For me. Dandy stood there, trembling violently as the dog barked at him with increasing ferocity. He squeezed his eyes shut, his finger tightening on the trigger. Boom! Dandy's eyes flew open as he jerked awake, his heart racing and his body drenched in a cold sweat. He found himself lying in the grass by the brook. Ripple startled by his sudden movement, but very much alive and normal. As Dandy calmed down and came to his senses, he looked around at the fireflies dancing in the evening air. His gaze fell on the rifle lying in the grass near his feet, then shifted to Ripple, who was now sitting beside him, looking concerned. Hey, come on, boy, Dandy said softly, his voice still shaky from the nightmare. With a determination in his step, Dandy led Ripple back to the spot where they had first found the rifle. To Dandy's shock, the body was gone. Nervously, Dandy scanned the trees, half expecting something to jump out at him. He approached the spot at the cliff where the body and rifle had been, his heart pounding in his chest. Carefully, he took the rifle off his back and gently placed it in the dirt where he had originally taken it. When he stood up, he looked around and noticed that his dog was gone. Rip! Dandy called out, his voice tinged with worry. Rip! Dandy spun in circles frantically, searching for his loyal companion. Ripple! Ripple, come here, boy! He shouted, his voice echoing through the woods. Rip! Rip, where are you? Rip! He cried out desperately. He stopped spinning and yelling, standing there looking around and breathing heavily. The silence of the forest was oppressive, broken only by his ragged breaths. Dandy turned to look back at the rifle, but to his shock, it was gone. Suddenly,
A bone-chilling roar came from the top of the cliff. Dandy looked up, his eyes widening in horror. It was Zombie Rip, the undead dog, leaped down from the cliff, landing directly in front of Dandy with a menacing growl. Dandy began pacing backwards slowly, trembling uncontrollably. To his terror, he felt himself bump into something solid behind him. It was the gun owner, Zombie. The zombie grabbed Dandy by his shoulders, leaning in to whisper in his ear with putrid breath, "Take my rifle." He started to walk Dandy, shoving him along, forcing him by the shoulders straight at the zombie dog. Rip was gnashing his teeth and growling rabidly at Dandy, who was shaking uncontrollably. Dandy was pushed right past the dog, sobbing now as he looked down at his once faithful companion in horror. He was shoved further, right up to where the gun lay. The zombie gun owner shoved Dandy to the ground, sitting him next to the gun. "Take my spot," the zombie rasped. The zombie walked away, whistling as he did. Zombie Rip rushed to his side, still man's best friend, even in undeath. Dandy lay there trembling, sitting up against the cliff wall beside the rifle, while the zombie and zombie R.I.P. walked off together. The zombie petted the zombie dog, his tail wagging as they disappeared into the woods. Dandy remained sitting, trembling, his eyes fixed on the gun. Suddenly there was a rustling through the bushes. A man stepped out holding a musket.
He walked over and stood right in front of Dandy, who trembled, staring at him in confusion. The man looked like a mountaineer, with a backpack and a foreign hat. He pointed the musket at Dandy. "All right, lad, here, be a good sport about this," the mountaineer said, his voice eerily calm. Dandy's eyes widened in realization, and he tried to grab the rifle, but boom! Dandy was dead, laying up against the cliff bottom with the rifle beside him, just like the man he had taken it from originally. The mountaineer stood there looking proud of a job well done. He nodded, tipped his hat, and said, "There we are, everything's all back in order." Then he turned and walked away, leaving Dandy's body behind, and so many questions unanswered. As night fell, Zombie Rip and his new zombie human walked up to the edge of the brook. They sat together, seemingly enjoying the scenery. The zombie human petted Zombie Rip lovingly, a grotesque smile on his decaying face. The dog wagged its mangy tail in response. "Your name's just Rip now, by the way, not Ripple," the zombie said, still petting the dog. "Rest in peace, boy. Rest in peace. You're a good boy." Zombie Rip barked, a sound somewhere between a growl and a howl, and licked his new master's face with his rotten tongue. As the scene fades out, we see them sitting together, enjoying the peaceful setting. Fireflies danced around them, their gentle light contrasting with the gruesome pair. The gentle moonlight bathed the scene in an eerie glow, a final image of unnatural peace in a world turned upside down.
Tales of the Incandescent, Blackpoint 10, Feudal Japan, X and Y, and the Lightbulb. You'd think something really interesting would happen, right? As white light fades, we find ourselves on a hillside overlooking the edge of a cliff in Feudal Japan. The sun is just beginning to rise, casting a soft glow over the landscape. Below, a massive army of Japanese imperial soldiers and samurai marches by, their lavish armor glinting in the early morning light. Many ride horseback, carrying spears and an impressive array of weaponry, embodying the might of a powerful Eastern legion of the era. Up on the hill, Y is engrossed in practicing judo, his movements fluid and focused. X, meanwhile, is crouched on her knees at the edge of the cliff, observing the endless stream of soldiers below. She glances back at Y, who continues his practice undisturbed. "Aren't you worried that giant army down there might see you and think you're a threat or something?" X asks, her voice tinged with concern. Without breaking his concentration, Y replies nonchalantly, "Nah." X rolls her eyes, unsurprised by his cavalier attitude. "Why am I not surprised?" she mutters. After a moment, another question occurs to her. "Hey, why did that last world have no color?" Y, still immersed in his judo, offers a zen-like response. "You gotta not sweat the small stuff." Exasperated, X retorts, "Asking you questions is like pulling teeth." "Yup," Y confirms, continuing his practice unperturbed. X turns her attention back to the army below. As she scans the scene, something catches her eye. "Hey, is that?" she begins, leaning forward for a better look. We zoom in on the ground where the army marches, focusing on a wire lying in the dirt. A horse's hoof lifts it momentarily as it trots by. X watches this unfold, a hint of anticipation in her voice as she says, "Well, here we go." Behind Y, tucked away in a small cavernous fissure in the landscape, the light bulb begins to glow. As we watch Y maintain his judo practice, bright light pours out from the fissure, bathing the scene in its radiance. Amid the intensifying light and his unwavering judo movements, Y remarks sagely, "That's the spirit." As the bright light engulfs everything, the scene gradually fades to pure white, leaving us to wonder what adventures await our enigmatic duo in the next episode or chapter, or whatever the hell this is now of their journey.
We apologize about the outbursts from the AI girl in the past few episodes. That was sloppy of us. We assure you, it will not happen again.